out over and over, Lord, have mercy on me. Now it's interesting because the story takes a little bit of a shift, and it starts in verse 23. It starts with Jesus' response. Listen to this highly spiritual, well-developed response to a woman in distress. Verse 23, but Jesus did not answer her a word. I don't know, I received training as a chaplain for how you deal with somebody in a crisis. I can't think of anybody that would say, I think the silent treatment is the best thing when somebody's in distress. Not going to talk to you. Did not answer her a word. And then something shifts at that point, right in the middle of verse 23. Jesus is ignoring her entirely. He's not saying a word, but notice the last half of the verse. It says, and his disciples came and begged him, saying, send her away, for she is crying after us. Do you catch the part that Matthew doesn't say that happens in the story? You see, what happens is she begins to yell out to Jesus, and it's likely that the disciples are all gathered around him, so she's trying to get Jesus' attention, yell through the disciples, and, Lord, Lord, have mercy, have mercy. But at some point, it changes because the disciples say, she's now crying after us. See, the disciples had already been sent out on previous occasions to preach the gospel and to heal the sick. They had already participated in that. So at some point, this woman shifts her attention from Jesus and maybe turns and says, can you help me? Can you do something? Can you get his attention? Can you heal my daughter? Starts asking all the disciples that are around him to see, is there anybody that can help me out in this situation? And what do the disciples do? Well, they're watching Jesus. They're like, well, he's giving her the silent treatment. We'll try that for a little bit. And it doesn't work because instead of them imitating Jesus and giving the silent treatment, they start imitating the woman, and they start begging Jesus, Jesus, you got to do something about this woman. But it's not just any kind of something. They say, Jesus, send her away. Not heal her daughter, not hear her prayer, not do something about her distress. Jesus, get her out of here. The same kind of request that would be made of a demon. Cast out the demons. Send the demons away. She doesn't deserve any greater attention than that. But Jesus, if you'll just say something and send her away, we won't have to worry about her anymore. Now, this mother is running up against a severe amount of challenge at this point. None of the disciples are listening to her. She's at least gotten their attention so that they're now badgering Jesus on her behalf, sort of. And this is where her opportunity begins to come up. Verse 24, Jesus, who started with the silent treatment, now moves to this as his intervention to try to meet her needs, I guess. Verse 24, he answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Ouch. I don't know what's going on here. I mean, from a clinical, spiritual perspective, what in the world is Jesus doing? I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And she's not one of those, in case you were wondering. We've already established that. And this is where I start to wonder. What is in the makeup of this mother that she sticks around? Why does this phrase from Jesus not work in sending her away? Why does she stay around after this point? Notice, she doesn't give up at that point. Instead, she ups the ante. Verse 25, but she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. She finally found a break in the action. She finally found an opportunity, and she's going to make it really difficult on Jesus now. She's not yelling at him. She is literally in front of him, kneeling down. She's showing reverence. She's asking for help, and she's insisting, if you want to get rid of me this time, Jesus, it's going to have to get physical. Because think about it. Somebody's right there in your space. You could walk around them. You could walk away. You could knock them out of the way. You've got to do something physically now to change what's happening. Lord, help me, she says. Which I imagine, by the way, how she's addressing Jesus is a little bit offensive to the disciples. Why is she talking about him as Lord? Why is she acting like there's some sort of relationship or connection that should be expected between her and him? And I can't say I'm all that fond of Jesus' response in the next verse either. If we've questioned his intervention so far, his spiritual care so far, verse 26 leaves us scratching our heads again. Jesus answered, "It's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Ugh. He's saying, what you're asking from me, that belongs to the children of Israel. That belongs to the favored ones. That belongs to the members of the family. You're asking me to give that to you, a dog. What do you do with that? What she does with that is the part that leaves me mesmerized. I don't know exactly how to explain what Jesus is doing. I've heard people attempt to explain it. I've heard people say, he knew all along. He understood this all along. I had another friend who told me recently, this is the first time I'd heard this. He said, I think that this woman actually taught Jesus a lesson in this story, that he had a perspective that he had been holding on to, and she taught him, nope, you're wrong, Jesus. You're not just to the house of Israel, right? I don't know which way you lean on that, but what I see in this story is that resilience and tenacity, that there's something this mother had tapped into, that she said, I'm not stopping until my daughter is made whole again. Listen to her response. Yes, Lord, she said. Yes, Lord, you're right. You can't take the food from the children and give it to the dogs. Yes, Lord, you're right. The children of Israel, they are the children. Those are the ones that deserve the bread. They are the ones that deserve to be fed. Yes, Lord, I am one of the dogs. I am one of the outcasts. I am one of the outsiders. Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Do you hear what kind of belief system this woman has? She has the kind of belief in Jesus that says, if you could give me even an ounce of that grace, even just the smallest portion, I know that it's powerful enough to change my daughter's life. The disciples didn't get that, I promise you. The Pharisees and the scribes and the other religious leaders, they didn't get that. But this woman said, I know and I believe and I trust in the grace of God enough to say, just give me the scraps, just give me the crumbs. My daughter will be made well. And finally, Jesus says something that makes sense to me. Verse 28, Jesus answered her, "O woman, great is your faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. Now, I said to you before, I don't totally know how to make sense of what Jesus was doing here. I've heard a number of different ideas, including things that are written in the Spirit of Prophecy, and I struggle still with this interaction. I can't fathom ever using this as an intervention when I'm trying to treat somebody in a crisis in a hospital setting. We actually have this process that we go through in training for chaplaincy, something called verbatims. Maybe you've heard of them in your line of work or in another line where you go in, have a visit with a patient or family, and then you reflect on it and try to write up word for word what the encounter looked like. Okay? If I was Jesus and this was the visit I had with a patient, I can't see me bringing this as a verbatim. I'm not writing this visit up. Like, when they say, which one do you want to write about? Not that one. I can't see me including the lines in there. I think I would get to the part where I called her a dog. I'd get to the part where I'd say, I don't want any business with the silent treatment. I'd just scratch all that out and say, yeah, this visit went well. I said, your faith is great. Go be healed, right? Perfect visit. Don't even need the doctor on this one, so don't you worry. But if I had included it, I can't imagine the grief I would have gotten from my colleagues. What on earth were you thinking? And the best answer I could give is what my friend said to me the other day about this passage, is to say, Jesus learned a lesson in this story. I'm like, good. Jesus learned a lesson, move forward and move on. Now, some people are uncomfortable with that. Say, no, I don't know. Jesus had to know what he was doing. I don't know if it matters really which camp you're in on that. Maybe you say, no, absolutely. Jesus knew what he was doing. It was bold. It was risky, but he understood. He read the situation. Perhaps. If you want to say, no, I think Jesus needed to learn too in this situation, that's fine with me as well. Because the truth is that Jesus himself had to go on a process of growth. And this is pretty profound to me. That Jesus didn't just come to the place like we see in verse 28 like that. He actually grew and developed in the way he came to understand the world and the way he came to treat people. And that is in large part due to the tale of mother number 2. Now, if this first one's a hot mess, but still gets what her daughter needs, then the mother that we're talking about with Jesus, she's the bomb.com mom, right? Mary. And I just want you to know, too, I am at exactly the right age to be able to get away with saying thebomb.com. Because I'm old enough to have the gray hairs that say, yeah, I can say that, and I don't care if I'm cool anymore. It doesn't matter. But she would be, to many people, like, man, she's perfect. She's got it all together. I mean, think about it. From the beginning, an angel from God shows up and says, hey, Mary, we hatched this plan up in heaven, and we want you to be a part of it. All right, so what's the plan? You are going to get pregnant before getting married, before being with a man, and it's going to be the Son of God, the Messiah. And we want you to hold to that story throughout the process. No problem, right? What does Mary say? Okay, I'm going to do it. Really? Really? She just goes right into it. Later on, she goes through an experience. You don't see a whole lot of in the story of Mary and of Jesus as a child. You go through the first 12 years, and there's not a lot that is in the 4 Gospels about Jesus' life. But at the age of 12, his family goes to his first Passover in Jerusalem. And when they get to Jerusalem, when they get there for the whole experience, in the whole just the chaos of the moment, Jesus gets lost in the crowd. He finds himself at the temple. He's talking with the teachers and the leaders, and he's listening, and he's asking them questions. And he gets lost, right? And when Mary shows up, this is an incredible part of the encounter. This is in Luke chapter 2. We'll go ahead and take a look at this passage too. When they finally show up 3 days later, they're there and they're wondering, what in the world has Jesus done? In Luke chapter 2, and let's look first here in verse 46 where it picks up. It says, after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, son, why have you treated us so? That seems like a reasonable question. Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. And he said to them, why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I was to be in my father's house? All right, mothers of 12 and 13 and preteen-year-old kids, like, your child gets lost for 3 days, and you return, and this is their response. What do you say? I'm fully expecting Mary to say, Father, what? You get out of here right now and get on the donkey. We're going back home. That's it, right? Not another word from you. But she's a pretty chill mom, I guess, and she had a deep understanding. Even in verse 50 when it says she didn't have understanding. They didn't understand the saying that he spoke to them. But verse 51, when he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them, and his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. Now, that is profound in the sense that it is a transition to something even more transformative. She treasured all of these things in her heart, and the continuation of the thought is in verse 52. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Mary was receptive of this wild idea to have a child born of a virgin be the Messiah. Mary was receptive when she was confused and not sure about Jesus' calling. And Mary was persistently there with him, encouraging him towards his first miracle, with him throughout his ministry, following along there at the cross on the day Jesus died. Many people look and say, man, Mary, she was the perfect mom. She had it figured out. And I mean, when you think about the kind of pressure that moms can go through, when you get a sense for like, what's my child's calling in life? Like, what is it that they're supposed to be? What is it they're supposed to do? If your child is supposed to be the savior of the world, does that up the pressure a little bit as a mother? I mean, does that just like up the ante slightly? Feels like you have to be perfect. And we could read it through a lens that says, yeah, she was perfect. She did everything well. Except she did lose him for 3 days. She did insist on him doing a miracle, which he said, Mom, it's not my time. She did come to the point later of trying to interrupt some of Jesus' ministry and saying, I don't think you're doing this in the right way. And Jesus said some really strong words like, who is my mother? Whoa. I mean, the question, who is my father, had followed him all his life. But who is my mother? That had to hurt. And even when she saw him on the cross, did she fully yet understand what was happening? Now, I don't think Mary was a perfect mother, no matter how well she did at it. I think Mary was good enough for the task. I think God saw what she could do and what she could be, and it's profound to me that the Savior of the world could have an imperfect mom that still prepared him to fulfill his calling. In fact, in psychological terms, they now refer to that as something called the good enough mother, which maybe you don't like the way that sounds. I know I didn't like it when I first heard it, but here's the idea behind it. Is that a lot of times there's this thought process that goes, do you have a good mom or do you have a bad mom? And this actually begins from a very young age. See, what happens is a child starts to cry, even as an infant, and is hungry. Mom feeds the child. And child, oh, good, mom is here. The child maybe gets a little bit older, wants a certain toy, takes it from their sibling. Mom takes the toy back. Child cries, bad mom, right? And there's this process of development that a child goes through. Good mom, bad mom, good mom, bad mom. And at some point, these things in healthy development have to be brought together where a child can say, you know, I love my mom. Sometimes she does things that meet my needs and that are good to me. Sometimes she misses or makes mistakes, but I love her nonetheless, and kind of reconcile those two views. Because what happens is if you say, my mom is good all the time, do you know what happens if you say, my mom is good all the time, never makes any mistakes? You know the result of that? When she does make a mistake, that becomes your shame, even though it's not your mistake. You start internalizing that. That's the process each one of us has to go through to say, oh, wait a second, what is happening here? And reconciling the two and saying, yeah, mom is, and that's where the term came, a good enough mother. Consistently showing up, consistently caring, endeavoring to meet needs as much as she can. Not perfect, but able to meet those needs reliably so that you can grow and develop and flourish. Now, I've heard a lot of people when I say this, they're like, I don't like that phrase. I don't want to be like, good enough. You know, but if you can't be perfect, to realize that can be a great relief. To say, I don't have to do it perfectly. I don't have to do everything just exactly so. That there actually is something being provided substantially for showing up over and over again for your child, even if there are times when you make mistakes. And both of the mothers that I've been talking about so far, they're meeting that, where they're saying, I'm showing up. The Canaanite woman, she's saying, I'm showing up for my daughter. I may not have done everything right. I may not know how she got in this situation, but I'm showing up for her. Mary did the same thing. She might have felt that bar from day one. I've got to be perfect to raise the Savior of the world. And realize I can't do that, but I can keep showing up. I kind of like a better term than good enough mother. I like to think of it and think of the participation and the support of a God who's behind mothers as grace is enough, mother. Grace is enough. Yes, there will be mistakes, there will be misfires, there will be moments where you say, I don't quite get my child, I don't quite get what needs to be done, and we've all experienced those too from our mothers, where we've had those moments. But if grace is enough, then mothers can be empowered to just love on their children and keep caring for them. And we can be empowered with our mothers to say, okay, all right, I'm going to take that good that came from it, I'm going to accept grace as the power to forgive what wasn't quite where it needs to be. Sometimes that process can be really tricky and challenging. I'm not undermining that, just recognizing. But grace is enough. And that powerful things come out of that. The scriptures actually compare God on multiple occasions to being a mother. We miss this because of, things like the Lord's Prayer, our Father, Father and Son. But the scriptures actually have plenty of them, where it compares God to being like a mother bear protecting her cubs, where it talks about a mother nursing her child. And God says, this is what I'm like. To actually a mother giving birth, to going through the process of developing life, that God says, I identify with all of this. It is a divine and sacred thing. And you look very much like God in these acts. I think that's a profound and beautiful reality. And it's the reminder that it's that God that says, grace is enough. Grace is enough for what mothers have been called to do, for what all of our mothers have been called to do in our life. And that leads me to the tale of mother number 3. I got a call to the ICU one day from a nurse, and it's like is often the case. A patient had died. In this case, a patient in his early to mid-30s, and I would say that it had elements of it, at least, that were unexpected. By the time he got to the ICU, it wasn't unexpected, but certainly was the kind of situation where you'd say he was lost before his time. And as I came up there and I met with some of the family, in particular his wife, I started to sense some tension between her and some of the staff. And I heard one of the nurses saying, she can't do this. She can't do this. And I asked for clarification, what's going on here? She said, she wants to bring her 5-year-old son in here to see the body, and she can't do this. She can't bring him in the ICU. She can't bring him in this room. This isn't a good idea. And she was going on about that. I realized there was some distress over it. So I was meeting with the mother and getting a sense for what she wanted to do and what she was looking at in the situation. She had 2 sons, a 14-year-old and one that was 5 years old. And she was saying, I want them to be in the room. I want them to be able to say goodbye to their father. And in particular, she was fighting for her 5-year-old to be in there. And so I thought, well, I wanted to come alongside her. I did not give her the silent treatment, just so you know. But I came alongside her to sense, what will be best in this situation. It can become very tricky, and there's a reason for the distress around it. So I said, well, why don't we go visit with your son together? He's out in the waiting room, and let's see, what comes of this. So we go out into the waiting room, and the 14-year-old was preparing to go in, and the 5-year-old was there. And his mom bent down and started talking to him and said, do you want to go into the room, to see your dad? And she started motioning to a little girl that was there next to him about the same age that was his cousin, and said, I don't remember her name, but said, she can come in with you. And she pushed herself back on the couch and no, the little girl. A little 5-year-old boy stood there, and with a surety and a confidence said, I want to see my dad. And she said, okay. And so we walked down the hall of the ICU with eyes staring on, glares here and there, worried glances. And we went into the room. And the mom went to the opposite side of the room over by the wall. We went through these big glass doors that slide open, and she went onto the opposite side, was sitting on the bed facing out there in a chair. Her 14-year-old son was sitting just behind her on the couch, and the little 5-year-old ran over and hopped up in her lap, wrapped his arms around her. And then he looked at her, he looked at his dad's lifeless body there and said, can I hug him? She said, yeah. So he reaches down and gives him a big hug and says, I love you, Daddy. And he lets go, he settles back into her lap, and she's crying, and he's holding her, and he gives her a squeeze, and he gets out of her lap, he comes over to a 14-year-old, he's got his head in his hands, and he's crying, and the little 5-year-old Colton is what we'll call him, although all the names are changed for confidentiality's sake. But Colton goes and places his hand on his 14-year-old brother and just kind of pats him there on the shoulder. And he doesn't have any tears. He doesn't have a full, gravity for the situation, but he's very attentive to the tenor and the emotion of the room. And all of a sudden, he notices the flowers that were brought for his dad. And so he sees the little flowers, the vase that are sitting there, and he runs and he grabs a white washcloth that was available, one of the clean white washcloths. He runs to the opposite side of the bed of his mom, places the washcloth on the floor, and then takes the vase of flowers and places them over there. And at this moment, I noticed the dad's head was facing out towards the outside. And the little boy looks at the flowers, Colton, he looks at the flowers that are there on the ground, and he looks very upset at where they're at. And I said, does your dad need to see the flowers? And so, yeah. I said, let's get this table. So we bring a table over there, so it's up there right at the level, and put it there. And he put it right in his line of sight, if his dad would ever open his eyes to see it. And then he catches the attention of a marker board that's there for all the medical information, that we have in the room. Pain scales and who the nurse is today and all those things. He sees a dry erase marker, which is like a magnet for little kids, yes. And I said, do you want the dry erase marker? And he nods his head. I said, do you want to write on the board? Yeah. So he takes the marker and he draws a figure. I can't for the life of me figure out what the figure is. Then he starts putting little hearts around that figure. And then he writes right underneath it, D-A-D-D-Y, Daddy. And he goes and he pats his 14-year-old brother on the shoulder again, gives him a hug, jumps up in the lap of his mom, wraps his arm around her, looks at his dad, and after a bit, he looks to me and he says, is my daddy going to come back to life again? And I was honestly stunned at that question, because many times in these settings, words like death and life are avoided for more colloquial things like he's gone, he's resting, that kind of a thing. He's not with us anymore. And I'm aware also of the process, the developmental process of thinking of death differently at different ages. And didn't want to confuse anything, didn't want to overstate anything. I just looked back at him with sadness and said, no, he's not. Little Colton hung his head quietly and just reflected on his loss. After a little while, his mom said, I think I'm ready to go now. Is there any paperwork that I need to complete? And I said, there's some, very little. I was like, but if you're not ready to do it now, you can wait. It doesn't have to be done right away. We can still take care of your husband in the meantime. And she said, yeah, I'm not ready for it. I can't do it right now. And Colton pipes in and says, I want to help with the paperwork. And I said, well, this is something that needs to be signed by somebody who's 18 years or older. And I bent down to him. I said, are you 18 years or older? No. I'm 5. I said, thank you for your willingness, but, we need somebody older that can take care of this. Well, I want to sign some paperwork. And I said, okay, well, let me get you something. So I went out and I found some of the sheets that are used for charting that get cut into scraps later, so they're in these sections of 4, but they have a lot of check boxes on them and like lines for signatures, and so I brought it into him and I said, okay, you can sign this paperwork here for me. And he said, what are all these boxes for? I said, well, those are little boxes where you check off that, different tasks have been taken care of to make sure we're taking care of your dad in the best way possible. And he said, oh, okay. I said, yeah, so you can check any of those boxes you need to. He's like a check mark? I said, yeah, like this. I showed him a check mark. So he goes diligently working on it. I check in with the mom and with the teenage son a little bit, and I come back. He says, all right, my paper is all ready. And he'd put in every one of those boxes, every one of the check boxes, a little heart. Which in my mind, I imagine that instead of a check mark, he said, no, that's not enough for my dad. This is care at the ultimate level. Little heart in every single box. And he said, so now do I sign it? I said, yeah, right here. And he said, how do I sign it? I said, well, you write your name. And he wrote it out. Colton. Handed it to me and said, there we are. We're all done. And then said goodbye to his dad for the last time. I've wondered what difference it made that mom fought for him to be in that room that day. What difference it will make in processing the grief in the days ahead. You don't just replace the loss of a parent, mother or father at the age of, you don't just replace it. That's a grief that just stays with you. In fact, loss of a mother or father stays with you at any age. But to lose his dad so young would mean there is pain to be revisited year in and year out through the rest of his life. And I thought, what if he hadn't gotten that moment? How did she know he needed to be there? But she knew. She knew. And stories like that remind me that, yeah, it's, a good enough mother that's predictably there again and again, reliable and consistent. I had a near 70-year-old man tell me the other day, I remember my mom made me a lunch every day for school. A grace is enough kind of mother. One who says, no, this is the moment I fight for. This is the moment I stand. He needs this. He needs this. And I believe that story, that moment, will be a part of the healing across the years now, because that mother said, he's going to be in this room. That's the gift, to me, of the grace is enough mother. The one who says, I'm not going to get it right all the time. I mess up sometimes. But I love big, and I love strong, and I show up again and again and again, and I trust that the same God who gave me the gift of being a mother will give the grace necessary to make it work out. That's my hope, that you'd carry with you today in the celebrations of mothers and motherhood, that wherever you're at in that journey, if it's celebrating, if it's a process of healing, if it's a process of remembering, that you'd cherish the way God works through mothers to give every one of us life, and then to renew it again and again through moments like these. Let's pray. God of grace and mercy, God of profound love, love like a mother. Thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for the gift of mothers who bring us into this world, who care for us, who worry about whether what they're doing is perfect and just right. For those who have appreciated the gift of mothers and yet been deprived of the opportunity for motherhood themselves. For those who are missing their mothers, who only have the memories. God, thank you for all of this, and thank you that we know that in the moments of questions, of confusions, of heartache, as well as of joys and celebrating, that your grace is enough. May you give us the strength we need for celebrating, for healing, for remembering, for all the mothers that you have given to us. We thank you for this most wonderful gift. In Jesus' name, amen.